If your wife humiliated you in front of your friends. By saying she'd rather run back to her ex and then panicked. When you calmly mentioned divorce, would you still believe it was just a joke? Or would you start counting the dates she thought you'd never check? My name is Adrian Holt, and for 20 years I thought I understood the rules of my own marriage, mostly because I was the one who paid attention to the boring parts, like which bills were due, which friends were fragile, and which jokes were only funny if you laughed first. I married Lena when we were both young enough to think love was a permanent weather pattern, and I stayed married to her long enough to learn that love is more like a city, bright at a distance, messy up close, and built on quiet maintenance nobody applauds. I am not a romantic man, at least not in the way people post about, but I am loyal in the way that actually costs you something, the way you show up even when there is no audience and no reward. That night started like 100 other nights, with a text from Lena that said she would be late because the girls wanted one more drink, and with me answering that I would keep the food warm, even though I already knew we were not eating at home. She had insisted we go to Jonas and Claire's place because it was a small get-together, which in our friend group usually meant 10 people, 2 bottles of whiskey, and at least one conversation that made you wonder why you ever trusted anyone with your private life. I went because declining would have been noticed, and I learned a long time ago that people notice absences more than they appreciate effort. Their house was warm and overlit, with music that tried too hard to sound carefree, and with that familiar scent of roasted meat mixed with expensive candles that never smell like anything real. I shook hands, kissed cheeks, smiled at stories I had heard before, and played the reliable husband role so smoothly that it felt like a suit I forgot I was wearing. Lena arrived 20 minutes after me, wearing that polished look she reserved for nights she wanted attention from the room, not from me, and she slipped into the conversation as if she had been there the whole time. She kissed my cheek quickly, more habit than affection, and I caught a faint trace of cologne that was not mine, sharp and citrusy, like someone wanted to announce himself without saying a word. I let it go, because a marriage can survive a lot if you don't pick at every thread, and because the easiest way to become the villain is to act like a detective in your own home. Still, I watched her the way you watch a glass on the edge of a table, not because you want it to fall, but because you know it might. Her laughter came faster than usual. Her eyes moved around the room more than they used to, and she kept her phone in her hand like it was a second pulse. Later, when the alcohol settled into everyone's confidence, Jonas started telling a story about his first relationship, one of those harmless nostalgia tales that always ends with someone saying they were young and stupid and lucky to survive themselves. People laughed, added their own memories, and then Claire, half teasing and half fishing, turned the conversation toward Lena and me. She made a comment about how solid we were, how we were the couple everyone secretly looked at when their own relationship felt shaky, and she said something about 20 years being a miracle. The room hummed with agreement, the kind people offer when they want proof that stability is still possible. Lena lifted her glass and smiled, and for a brief second I believed she might lean into the compliment, might honor the years we had carried together. Instead, she tilted her head, put on a face that belonged on a stage, and said, with a laugh that was meant to sound playful, that being happy with me was not exactly her dream scenario. She took a slow sip, eyes glittering, and then she dropped the line like a match into gasoline, saying she would rather run back to her ex than stay with me. The laugh that followed was thin, uncertain, and delayed, like a bad echo. A couple of people smiled anyway, because people are trained to treat cruelty as humor if it is presented with the right tone. Jonas chuckled because he did not know what else to do, and Claire's mouth tightened in the way it does when someone realizes the room just changed shape. Someone else made a nervous joke about old flames, and somebody glanced at me to see if I would take the bait and explode, because an angry man is entertainment and a calm man is a problem. I did not explode, and I did not plead, and I did not perform the humiliation they were waiting for. I looked at Lena, still smiling, and I felt something inside me click into place, not like a heart breaking, but like a lock turning. People talk about betrayal as if it is always a dramatic knife in the back, but sometimes it is simply watching someone you trusted choose to disrespect you publicly, and realizing they expected you to accept it quietly. I smiled the way I smile at a clerk who makes a mistake and needs to fix it, and I said calmly that if she was already cheating on me with him, then maybe we should file for divorce. I said it like I was discussing a schedule change, like I was talking about a practical step that follows a practical problem. I did not raise my voice, and I did not look around for allies, because I did not need the room's permission to decide what I was willing to live with. Lena's laugh died mid-breath, and the change was immediate and almost ugly, because it was the moment her performance stopped working. She stared at me as if I had slapped her, even though I had not moved, and her eyes flicked around the faces in the room, searching for the old balance, searching for someone to make this feel like a joke again. She tried to smile, but the muscles did not obey, and she set her glass down too hard, a small clink that sounded louder than it should have. She leaned closer to me, voice dropping, and I heard the panic underneath her words even as she tried to keep her tone light. She said she did not mean it, that everyone was just joking, that I was being dramatic, and then, as if she could not decide which strategy would save her, she shifted to pleading. She told me not to take it seriously, not in front of everyone, not like this, not after all these years. Her hand brushed my arm, a gesture that would have felt affectionate if it had not been timed like a desperate correction. The room went quiet, in the careful way people get quiet when they sense that something real is happening and they want to protect themselves from being implicated. Claire stepped in with a brittle laugh and tried to redirect, saying we were all a little tipsy, saying Lena was just being Lena, saying we should play a game or open another bottle. Jonas nodded too fast, relieved at any escape route, but his eyes kept returning to me as if he expected me to do something that would let everyone else relax. I let them relax, because I have always been considerate, sometimes to my own disadvantage. I told Lena we could talk later, and I said it without warmth and without anger, the way you tell someone you will discuss a damaged contract when you have time. I turned back to the group, accepted a refill I did not want, and allowed the conversation to restart, but my mind did not restart with it. It stayed on the moment Lena chose to humiliate me as entertainment, and on the speed with which she panicked when she realized the cost might land on her, not on me. I watched her for the rest of the night with a quiet patience that would have looked like forgiveness to anyone who did not understand me. She stayed close, too close, laughing too loudly at other people's jokes, trying to prove she had not just detonated something. Every few minutes she touched my arm or my shoulder as if physical contact could rewrite what she said, and each time it felt less like love and more like a public display meant to reassure the audience that the show was still under control. When we finally left, the cold air outside hit us like a reality check, and Lena walked faster than usual, as if she could outrun the consequences with momentum. In the car, she started talking immediately, filling the space with explanations, with blame aimed at the alcohol, with complaints about how I embarrassed her. She said I had no sense of humor, that I always took things too seriously, that I knew she did not mean it, and then she pivoted back into soft pleading, saying we had built a life together, saying we had history, saying I should not throw it away over one stupid line. I drove without responding, because silence is not just the absence of words, it is a mirror, and people hate seeing themselves clearly. The streetlight slid over the windshield in slow bands, and I felt my hands steady on the wheel, not shaking, not clenched, simply steady. In that steadiness was the truth she could not handle, which was that I was not threatening her, and I was not negotiating, and I was not trying to scare her into behaving. I was making a decision, quietly and completely, the way you decide to leave a building when you smell smoke. At home, she followed me through the hallway, still talking, still trying to bargain with tone and memory, and when I went to the kitchen to set my keys down, she blocked the doorway like a guard. She asked me if I was really serious, and she sounded offended by the idea that I might be. She said I was being cruel, that I was punishing her, that no one else's husband would react like this, that I was acting like she committed a crime. I looked at her for a long moment, and in that moment I noticed small details I had ignored before, like the way her hair smelled freshly washed even though she claimed she came straight from work, and like the faint smudge of makeup near her collarbone that looked like it had been wiped in a hurry. I told her I was tired and that we would talk in the morning because I did not want a late-night debate about loyalty with someone who treated marriage like a prop. I walked past her and went upstairs, and she stood at the bottom of the steps as if she might call after me, but she did not. In the bedroom, I changed, brushed my teeth, and lay down without turning the light off immediately because I wanted to feel the quiet and measure it. Lena came in later, moving softly, the way someone moves when they are afraid the floor might accuse them. She climbed into bed and faced away from me, and for a long time neither of us spoke. I could feel her awake, tense, waiting for me to reassure her that she still owned the center of my life. I did not reassure her because reassurance is earned, and because I finally understood what her joke was really testing. It was not about her ex, not truly, and not even about our friends' laughter. It was about whether I would accept disrespect as long as it was packaged as humor. In the dark, I stared at the faint outline of the ceiling and listened to her breathing, and I made a quiet promise to myself that I would not argue with her about what she said. I would not chase her story, and I would not try to convince her to choose me. I would simply watch what she did next, and I would let her choices become her consequences. Because if Lena could laugh about running back to her ex in front of our friends, then the only question that mattered was whether she had already done it, and whether she believed I was too loyal, too predictable, and too afraid of change to ever prove her wrong. The next morning arrived with the kind of thin winter light that makes everything look honest, even when the people inside the room are not. and I lay there long enough to listen for the small tells that used to mean comfort, like Lena humming while she made coffee or the shower running too long because she was still half asleep. Instead, there was only quiet movement downstairs, careful and measured, the way someone moves when they are trying not to wake a judge. When I finally came down, she was already dressed, already holding her travel mug like a shield, and her eyes kept hopping to my face as if she could read my decision in the muscles around my mouth. She tried to act normal in the way people do when they know normal is over, asking if I wanted eggs, asking if I had slept, asking about a meeting I had later that week, stacking questions on top of each other like sandbags. I answered with short, calm words, not because I was punishing her with silence, but because every extra sentence felt like a gift she had not earned. She eventually stopped talking and started watching me, and that was the part she hated, because she could survive my anger if she could push me into a fight, but she could not survive my calm if it meant I had already stepped out of the old game. She said she wanted to clear the air, and then she tried to soften her face into something tender, as if tenderness could erase last night's cruelty. She said she had been joking, that our friends knew her sense of humor, that I had made it worse by turning it into divorce talk, and she said it the way a person says fire after the building has already burned. I looked at her and felt none of the old urge to rescue her from her own discomfort, because I finally understood that she did not fear losing me as a partner. She feared losing me as a stable platform for her life. I told her calmly that jokes have a price when they are meant to humiliate, and that I would not spend the rest of my life being the punchline that keeps her entertained. Her eyes widened at the steadiness in my voice, and she tried one more time to turn it into a misunderstanding, but the words came out brittle and impatient. Then she did something small that mattered, which was that she checked her phone while she was talking to me. Not a quick glance for time, but a reflexive tilt and swipe, like the phone had priority over the moment. She caught herself and lowered it, but the damage was done, because I had seen the instinct, and instinct tells the truth faster than the mouth ever does. She left for work earlier than usual, claiming she had a morning meeting, and she said it too quickly, as if she had practiced the line in her head. I watched her from the kitchen window as she backed out of the driveway, and I noticed she did not look toward the house the way she usually did, the brief check that says you are leaving something you care about. She just drove away, straight and fast, and the absence she left behind felt deliberate. I sat at the table after she left, hands wrapped around coffee I did not taste, and I made myself do something I had avoided for years, which was to look at my marriage as if it were a set of facts instead of a story I kept telling myself. Facts are colder, but they are also cleaner, and I needed clean. I opened the shared calendar on my phone, not because I wanted to spy, but because it was the same tool we both used for practical life, and I told myself that if she was telling the truth, the calendar would match it. The calendar did not scream anything dramatic, because real betrayal almost never does, but there was a pattern that made my stomach tighten, a series of late blocks labeled with vague phrases like planning, errands, catch-up, and committee, always in the same 2-hour window, always twice a week, and always scheduled with the same kind of lazy vagueness that assumes no one will ask. I scrolled back 3 months, then 6, and I saw the blocks appear like a slow infection, occasional at first, then steady, then normal. I did not confront her, because confrontation is a sugar rush that makes you feel powerful for 5 minutes and leaves you weak afterward. Instead, I did what I have always done when something threatens the foundation of my life, which is that I start building a ledger. Not a dramatic file folder with red string, not a fantasy of revenge, just a simple, quiet list of dates, times, and claims. Because the truth does not need theatrics, it only needs consistency. That afternoon, I went about my day the way I always did, answering emails, handling tasks, calling my mother back, even stopping at the grocery store for things Lena liked because habit is stubborn. In the aisle near the coffee, my phone buzzed with a notification from our shared credit card, and I felt my body go still before my mind caught up, because I had not seen that kind of alert in a while. The charge was not huge, but it was specific. A restaurant bill in a part of town we did not usually go to, a place Lena had once called pretentious and overpriced. The timestamp was late morning, and the name of the place felt like a small, sharp point in my chest because it did not match her morning meeting story. I stared at the screen for a few seconds, and then I did something that felt both petty and necessary, which was that I took a screenshot and saved it into a folder on my phone that I labeled with a neutral name. I did not label it revenge, and I did not label it evidence, because I was not trying to become someone else. I was trying to stay myself while I watched her become a stranger. When she came home that evening, she was bright in the way people get when they want to outrun suspicion, kissing my cheek, asking about my day, talking fast about office drama, and she kept circling back to the idea that we should move on from last night. She cooked dinner with extra effort, even lighting a candle as if romance could be bought in the span of an hour, and she kept looking at me like she was waiting for me to say the words that would restore her comfort. I ate with polite gratitude, because manners are not the same thing as forgiveness, and I listened more than I spoke, because listening makes people careless. At one point, she mentioned the meeting again, casually, saying it ran longer than expected, and she rolled her eyes about how the team always wastes time, which was a smarter lie than a simple one, because it sounds like a complaint, and complaints feel honest. I nodded, and I asked gently which office it was held in, because I was curious about a project she had mentioned weeks earlier. She hesitated, only for a heartbeat, but in that heartbeat I saw her mind flip through options like a deck of cards, and then she named a conference room I knew had been repurposed months ago. That was the moment the ledger became more than a list, because a mistake like that is not a random slip, it is a sign that the story is assembled, not lived. She noticed my expression, and she tried to recover by laughing and saying she did not remember the room name, because who remembers room names, and I let it go, because the best way to catch a lie is to let it keep walking until it trips. Later, while she showered, her phone lit up on the nightstand, and the screen flashed a preview of a message. Not the full content, just enough to show a name and a small fragment. The name was Evan, and the fragment was a question about whether she was still on for Thursday, with a location pin icon beside it. I did not touch the phone, and I did not pick it up, because I am not interested in breaking laws or boundaries to feel righteous. I simply looked at the screen, long enough to register what I saw, and then I stepped back as if the light might burn me. When she came out, wrapped in a towel, she noticed the phone's position, the angle of it, the fact that it had lit up, and her face tightened for a fraction of a second before she smoothed it into a smile. She picked up the phone with an exaggerated casualness, glanced at it, and then set it face down, as if she were tidying, not hiding. She climbed into bed and tried to cuddle against me with that familiar softness, and for a second the old muscle memory pulled at me, the old instinct to pretend things were fine because pretending is easier than rebuilding. Then I remembered her voice in Jonas's living room, the casual cruelty dressed up as humor, and I shifted slightly away. She froze, then tried to laugh, then asked if I was still mad, and her voice had that sharp edge that appears when someone's apology is only a strategy. I told her I was tired, because tired was the most truthful thing I could say without opening a fight, and I turned off the lamp while my mind stayed wide awake. In the dark, I repeated the name I had seen on the screen, Evan, and I tried to place it in the map of her past, because the past is never really past. It just changes addresses. Evan Pike was not a ghost. He was a real man with a real history, the one Lena had dated before me, the one she used to describe as exciting and reckless, the one she claimed taught her what she never wanted again. She had not mentioned him in years, which is exactly how people talk about the things they are still thinking about. I did not sleep much that night, because the mind does not rest when it senses a structural crack under its feet. I lay there listening to Lena breathe, and I could feel the distance between us like a physical object, heavy and unmoving. I told myself I would not act like a jealous husband, because jealousy is a weak suit, and she would play it against me. I would act like a man who heard what was said in public, took it seriously, and decided to stop living inside someone else's joke. By morning, the plan was not revenge in the cinematic sense, because I am not interested in explosions, I am interested in outcomes. The plan was simply this. I would gather small truths lawfully, I would document what she chose to deny, and I would prepare my life to function without her, so that when the moment came, my words would not be a threat. They would be a door already open. As Lena left for work again, she kissed my cheek with deliberate warmth, and she told me she loved me with the careful tone of someone testing whether the phrase still works. I watched her walk away, and I kept my face calm because I did not want her to see the shift in me yet. Then, just as the front door clicked shut, my phone buzzed again with another card notification, and the merchant name on the screen made my throat tighten because it was the same pretentious restaurant, the same part of town, and the charge was listed as a deposit for two. The deposit for two sat on my screen like a quiet confession, neat and clinical, with a timestamp that did not care about feelings, and I stared at it long enough to feel the strange relief that comes when reality finally stops pretending. I could have walked upstairs, knocked on the bathroom door, and asked her why a restaurant she claimed to hate suddenly needed a deposit in our name, but that would have been me giving her the gift of improvisation, and Lena was good at improvising when the room was watching. I wanted her to speak when she thought she was safe, not when she was cornered. So I did what a man does when he realizes he is living inside someone else's script. I started writing my own. I opened the Notes app on my phone, created a simple table, and typed the details exactly as they appeared, because truth becomes powerful when it is boring and precise. Date, time, merchant, amount, and that one small phrase that mattered more than the money, deposit for two. I saved it, took a screenshot, and then printed it later at the office, not because paper makes it more real, but because paper forces you to treat it like a fact, not a mood. I went to work and acted normal, which is to say I acted like the version of myself I had been for years. Competent, controlled, useful, the kind of man nobody worries about until he quietly stops carrying their weight. The day moved in its usual rhythm: emails, meetings, coffee, small talk with people who would never guess that my marriage was turning into a case file, and I noticed how easy it was for the world to keep spinning while my private life cracked. That contrast made me colder, and I did not fight it, because warmth was what Lena had been feeding on for a long time. At lunch, I sat in my car with the heater humming and opened our shared calendar again, not to hunt for drama, but to check consistency, because consistency is the one thing liars cannot fake forever. Thursday had a block on it, 2 hours labeled committee follow-up, the same lazy vagueness she always used, and it sat in the exact window that lined up with the restaurant deposit. I stared at the block and felt the temptation to laugh, not because it was funny, but because it was predictable, and predictability is the enemy of romance. I exported the week view as a PDF, saved it, and then I did nothing else because the ledger did not need to grow into obsession, it just needed to be complete. That evening, Lena came home late, carrying the faint smell of perfume that was not her usual, something sweeter and sharper, like a woman trying to sound younger without saying it out loud. She smiled too widely when she saw me, the kind of smile people use when they want to distract you from asking questions, and she started talking before her coat was even off, filling the room with stories about office chaos, about a coworker who could not manage deadlines, about a client who changed their mind 3 times. It was noise, and she was trying to bury a detail under it. I let her talk while I cooked because cooking gave my hands something honest to do, and I watched her from the corner of my eye the way a bartender watches a customer who is pretending they are sober. She kept checking her phone in half glances, and each glance had that same tiny urgency, like she was waiting for permission. When I asked her, calmly, if she wanted pasta or chicken, she answered too quickly, as if she had not even heard me, and then she apologized with a soft laugh that sounded rehearsed. During dinner she tried a different approach, the one where she acts sentimental, mentioning old vacations, reminding me of the cabin trip we took after our 10th anniversary, telling me she missed when we used to dance in the kitchen. She said it like she was selling me nostalgia at a discount, and I nodded politely, because nostalgia is not evidence, it is just a warm fog people hide inside. She asked if I was still upset about what she said in front of our friends, and she framed it like a childish misunderstanding, like my pride was the problem, not her disrespect. I told her, in a steady voice, that words matter when they are spoken in public, because public words become public truth, and she stiffened, just slightly, before she softened again. She said I was being dramatic. Then she corrected herself and said I was being sensitive. Then she corrected herself again and said she did not want us to fight. It was a dance of labels, always pushing the fault back toward me, and I watched her do it with the same quiet interest I would give to a stranger trying to pick my pocket. After dinner, she went to the living room and scrolled on her phone, and I cleaned up slowly, taking my time, because time makes people careless when they think the danger has passed. A notification buzzed, and she snapped the phone up and angled it away from me, which told me everything I needed without showing me a single word. Then she walked into the hallway and took the call in a low voice, the way people do when they think secrecy is subtle. I did not follow her, and I did not press my ear to doors, because I was not trying to win a spy game. I was trying to win my life back. When she came back, she acted relaxed, but her shoulders were slightly raised, and her smile did not reach her eyes. She asked if I wanted to watch something, and she chose a show I hated, which was a small tell, because she was not trying to connect. She was trying to create a normal-looking evening. I sat beside her and watched the screen without absorbing it, and I let my mind take inventory of the details that would matter later, like the fact that she was suddenly protective of her phone, like the fact that she kept touching the necklace at her throat as if it were an anchor. 2 days passed like that, a slow parade of forced normalcy, and each day delivered one more small truth. Nothing cinematic, just a trail of ordinary signs that added up to a pattern. Another card notification from a bakery near her office, a place she never visited when she was with me, and the purchase was for 2 coffees and 2 pastries. A rideshare receipt on our account late at night, with a pickup point that was not her workplace and not our home, and a drop-off that ended near a boutique hotel downtown. A tiny shift in her language when she talked about Thursday, the way she kept calling it busy, complicated, packed, the way people describe something they are excited about but cannot admit. On Wednesday night, she came home with a new dress in a bag, and she tried to make it sound casual, saying she found it on sale, saying she needed something nicer for work events, and she held it up for me to see like she was offering me honesty. It was a dress that did not match her office, not in color, not in cut, not in attitude, and I looked at it and felt the dry amusement of a man watching a lie put on makeup. I told her it looked good, because I did not want to scare her into changing plans, and she relaxed too quickly, because she wanted my approval more than she wanted my forgiveness. That night, when she fell asleep, I did something I had avoided for years, which was to think through the practical steps of separation like a grown man, not like a wounded husband. I made a list of accounts that were joint and accounts that were mine, bills that could be moved, subscriptions that could be canceled, documents that needed copies. I looked up a few local family law firms, not to file tomorrow, but to understand timelines and options, because if Lena thought I was bluffing, it was my job to remove bluffing from the equation. I saved 2 numbers, and I turned off my phone because I did not need to spiral. I needed to prepare. Thursday came with a strange stillness, as if the house itself was waiting for her to leave. Lena moved through the morning with exaggerated cheerfulness, humming while she made coffee, touching my arm a little too often, asking about my day as if she cared. She dressed carefully, more carefully than she ever did for work, and she took longer with her hair, and she applied lipstick she usually saved for weddings. She told me she had a committee dinner, that it might run late, that she would text me when she was heading home, and she said it with a practiced calm that made it sound responsible. I watched her in the doorway as she checked her reflection in the hall mirror, and I felt that old ache rise in my chest, the part of me that wanted to call her back, to ask her what we were doing, to beg her to remember 20 years of shared life. Then I remembered her laugh in front of our friends, the sharp casualness of her disrespect, and I let the ache pass without obeying it. She kissed my cheek and said she loved me, and I believed she believed it in the way selfish people believe their own comfort is love. The moment she left, my phone buzzed with another notification, the restaurant confirming the reservation details, and the subject line was neutral enough, but the preview showed the words, "Table for 2." I did not touch her accounts, and I did not open anything I was not authorized to see, because the last thing I wanted was a moral stain on my side of the ledger. I simply took a screenshot of the notification as it appeared on my device, saved it, and wrote the time down by hand on a sheet of paper, signing my name under it like a witness statement to myself. I drove into town that evening, not to catch her in the act like some pathetic husband hiding behind a newspaper, but to place myself near the arena where the truth was happening, because proximity changes how you think. I parked a block away from the restaurant, stayed in my car, and watched the entrance the way a man watches the door of a courtroom when his case is being called. I told myself I would leave after 10 minutes, that I was only here to steady my mind, but then I saw her. Lena arrived in a rideshare, stepping out with that careful confidence she used in social settings, and she looked around before she went in, the quick scan people do when they think they might be recognized. A few minutes later, another car pulled up, and a man stepped out with the easy posture of someone who expects to be welcomed anywhere. He was a little taller than me, dressed well, and he moved toward the door as if he belonged there, and when Lena saw him, she smiled in a way I had not seen in months, open and bright, like she was giving herself permission to be reckless. They did not kiss, not outside, because they were not stupid, but he placed a hand lightly at her back as they walked inside, and she did not flinch or pull away, and that small physical agreement felt louder than any confession. I sat in my car and watched the door close behind them, and I felt something settle inside me, heavy and final, like a lock clicking shut. I stayed for another minute, just long enough to prove to myself that this was not a misunderstanding, not a joke, not a dramatic story my mind invented because I was insecure. Then I started the car and drove home, and as I moved through the city lights, I realized the truth did not actually hurt the most. What hurt was how calmly she had been living with it, how easily she had been lying in our bed while she planned a table for 2. When I got home, the house was empty and quiet, and I walked into the study and opened the folder where I had been collecting small truths, and I placed today's notes inside with slow care. I looked at the growing pile and felt a cold satisfaction that surprised me, because I was not enjoying her betrayal. I was enjoying my own clarity. I sat at the desk and wrote one sentence at the bottom of the page, a simple line that would guide every move I made next. If she wants the story to be public, then the truth will be public too. Then my phone buzzed with a new message from Lena, and before I even read it, I could already hear the lie forming in her voice. Her message said the committee dinner ran long, that the agenda was a mess, that she was exhausted, and that she might crash at a coworker's place because she did not feel safe driving so late, which was a small masterpiece of careful phrasing because it created a reason for distance, a reason for delay, and a reason for me to look like the bad guy if I questioned it. I read it twice, not because I needed help understanding it, but because I needed to understand how she wanted me to react. and the thing she wanted most was a soft, permission-giving husband who would say, "Okay, take your time, love you, and then go to sleep like a loyal dog." I stared at the screen until the blue light made my eyes feel dry. Then I typed a calm response that gave her exactly what she thought she wanted, because if she believed I was still manageable, she would keep making mistakes. I told her to be safe, to text me in the morning, and to rest, and I added a simple heart emoji, which felt like putting a counterfeit bill into circulation, except this time I was the one printing it. I did not sleep that night, but I did not pace either, because pacing is what men do when they still think emotion will change outcomes. I sat at the kitchen table with a glass of water, listened to the refrigerator hum, and let the quiet do its work, because quiet is where you hear the truth that noise keeps you from admitting. Around midnight, my bank app showed another small charge, not dramatic, not a smoking gun, just a late-night convenience store purchase near that boutique hotel, and the receipt name sat there like a breadcrumb tossed onto the sidewalk. I screenshot the transaction, wrote the time down on paper, and signed the line the way you sign for a package you know you are never going to return. In the morning, Lena came home with the sun already up, and she moved through the front door like a woman trying to look casual while carrying something heavy. Her hair was slightly different, brushed with more care than a woman who slept on a couch usually manages, and her voice had that extra softness that people use when they are trying to smooth over a rough surface. She told me she slept at her coworker's place, that the coworker had a guest room, that she barely closed her eyes, and that she felt awful for worrying me, which was funny, because she had not worried me. She had insulted me with her assumption that I was still the kind of man who could be managed with a tired smile. I listened, nodded, and asked if she wanted coffee, because the easiest way to catch a liar is to make them comfortable enough to keep talking. She said yes, and she sat at the counter with her phone face down, like it was radioactive, like it might betray her before she could betray me again. She started describing committee drama in broad strokes, and I let her, because specificity is the enemy of lies, and she avoided it the way a child avoids a math problem. When she finished, she looked at me with a tight, searching expression, as if she was waiting for the moment when I would burst, accuse, demand, beg, and give her something emotional she could use later. Instead, I told her, in the same calm tone I used when discussing bills or car repairs, that I had been thinking about what she said at our friends' gathering, and that it did not sit right with me. Her shoulders stiffened, and she tried to laugh it off again, but the laugh broke halfway through because she could hear that I was not in the mood for theater. I reminded her, gently, that she had made a public joke about leaving me for her ex, and I told her that jokes are not harmless when they are used to humiliate someone in front of people who are supposed to respect them. She started to apologize, but her apology was the kind that tries to make the other person feel guilty for having feelings, and I had no appetite for that kind of poison. I said that I did not want an apology that was designed to close the topic, and I said that what I wanted was clarity about where we stood, because I was tired of living in a house where the truth was treated like an optional accessory. She looked offended, then wounded, then angry, moving through emotions like she was flipping through channels. She asked what I meant by clarity, and I told her, slowly, that I meant whether she still wanted to be married or whether she wanted the freedom to act single while keeping the safety of a husband at home. Her eyes narrowed at that, and for a moment I saw the real Lena, not the charming social version, not the playful friend group version, but the one who believed she could rewrite reality if she said the right words confidently enough. She told me I was being controlling, that I always wanted things on my terms, that she was allowed to have friends, allowed to have a life, allowed to talk to people from her past without it being a crime. She used the word crime like she was preparing the ground for a future story where I was the villain, and she was the trapped woman who just wanted to breathe. I let her speak without interrupting, because interruption gives a person something to fight, and I did not want to fight. I wanted her record. When she ran out of steam, I asked one simple question, and I asked it the way you ask a clerk to confirm the total, with no edge and no heat. I asked if she was seeing anyone else, specifically her ex, specifically in the way a married woman does not get to do without consequences. She stared at me like I had slapped her with a wet towel. Then she shook her head quickly and said no, and she said it too fast, which is always how lies leave the mouth when the liar has already rehearsed the denial. She added that she would never do that she was hurt, I could think it, that she was loyal, that she was just frustrated sometimes, and she leaned hard into the word frustrated like it was a moral excuse. I nodded again, as if I believed her, because at that point I did not need her to confess. I needed her to keep committing to the lie. I told her I wanted us to meet with a mediator, not because I was ready to file that day, but because I wanted the concept of separation to move from theoretical threat to practical reality. The word mediator landed on her like a cold coin, and she asked why we could not just talk like adults at home. I told her we had been talking for years, and the only thing that improved was her ability to dismiss my concerns with a smile. I said I wanted a neutral setting where choices had names, where timelines had dates, and where her public jokes could not hide behind friendly laughter. That afternoon she left for work with a face that looked calm, but her hands trembled slightly when she grabbed her keys, and that tremble was the first honest thing I had seen from her in days. The moment the door closed, I did not tear the house apart or snoop through drawers like a desperate man, because desperation makes you sloppy, and sloppy makes you lose. I simply opened my evidence folder and expanded it, moving screenshots into chronological order, printing 2 more pages, and putting them into clear sleeves with date labels, because presentation matters when you want people to respect truth rather than debate it. Then I called Jonah, one of the couples we had been friends with for a long time, the kind of friend who still believed marriage meant something and who still thought Lena was funny rather than cruel. I did not tell him the whole story, and I did not ask him to spy, because I do not need spies. I need social gravity. I invited him and his wife, Maren, over for dinner on Saturday, and I framed it as a reset, as a chance to clear the air after that awkward joke at the last gathering. Jonah sounded relieved, because people love the idea of peace, and he agreed quickly, and I thanked him with the polite warmth of a man who was building a room with a trapdoor. Saturday arrived with the kind of ordinary sunshine that makes betrayal feel even uglier, and Lena played the devoted wife all afternoon, cleaning the living room, arranging snacks, lighting a candle, performing domestic sincerity like it was a role she had memorized years ago. I watched her move around the house and felt a strange calm, because my fear was gone, and without fear, a man becomes very efficient. Jonah and Maren arrived on time, carrying wine and a cheerful mood, and for the first 30 minutes it almost felt like the old days. Laughter, small talk, harmless stories, the comfortable rhythm of people who have known each other for years. Then Lena did what Lena always did when she felt watched. She overreached. She made another joke, softer this time, about how I was being dramatic lately, how I needed to lighten up, how I could not take a little teasing, and she said it with that sweet smile that tells the room, "See, he is the problem, not me." Maren laughed politely, Jonah looked uneasy, and I let the moment sit for a second longer than comfort allows, because discomfort is where honesty begins. I said calmly, "That teasing stops being teasing when it becomes a pattern of public disrespect," and I said that I was not interested in being the punchline in my own marriage. Lena's smile tightened, and she tried to steer the conversation away, but I did not let her, because steering is control, and I was done letting her drive. I told Jonah and Maren, without drama, that Lena and I were considering separation, and I said it like it was a fact, not a threat, because facts do not beg for approval. Maren's face changed immediately, and Jonah sat forward, stunned, asking what happened, asking if this was serious. Lena's laugh died in her throat, and for a second she looked genuinely afraid, not of losing me emotionally, but of losing the story socially. She tried to speak, tried to frame it as me overreacting again, but her voice faltered because she could feel the room shifting, and she could feel that Jonah, at least, was not automatically on her side. I kept my tone even and said I had asked her directly if she was seeing someone else, and I said she denied it, and I said I hoped that denial was true, because if it was not, then we had nothing left to discuss except paperwork. The room went quiet in that way rooms do when a private truth becomes a public object, and Lena's eyes flashed at me with anger and panic mixed together. She reached for my hand under the table as if physical contact could glue the moment back together, and I did not pull away sharply because sharpness looks like guilt, but I did not squeeze back either because softness would be a lie. I looked at her and said I wanted honesty, not performances, and I watched her swallow hard as if she was tasting something bitter. Jonah asked if there was someone else, and Maren asked if Lena was unhappy, and Lena started talking quickly, too quickly, saying she never cheated, saying she would never, saying she was offended, saying she was stressed, saying she was joking, and every sentence sounded like a person stacking sandbags in front of a rising flood. I let her talk until she ran out of breath. Then I asked her one more question, quieter than the first, the kind of question that does not accuse but forces a choice. I asked her, in front of our friends, if she was willing to meet a mediator on Monday and put her denial on record, because if she was telling the truth, then the record would protect her as much as it would protect me. Her mouth opened, closed, and opened again, and she looked at Jonah and Maren like she wanted them to rescue her from the consequences of her own words. The candle on the table flickered, the wine glasses sat untouched, and the air felt suddenly thin. Then Lena said she needed a minute, and she stood up so fast her chair scraped the floor, and she walked into the hallway with her phone already in her hand, like the answer to my question was not inside her conscience, but inside someone else's approval. I stayed seated while she walked away, because chasing her into the hallway would have turned me into the kind of man she could describe later as unstable. And I had spent 20 years watching her test boundaries until she found the one that made people pity her. so I was not about to hand her that gift on a Saturday night in my own house. Jonah and Marin sat across from me with their faces caught between concern and confusion, and I could tell they were trying to decide whether they had just witnessed a private argument or the collapse of something they assumed was permanent, because most people treat long marriages like furniture. They do not notice the cracks until the leg snaps. I kept my voice low and steady, and I told them they did not do anything wrong by coming, because guilt spreads like smoke in moments like this, and I did not want them walking away thinking they had triggered it. Jonah asked if we should leave, and Marin asked if Lena was okay, and I said she was fine, that she simply did not like being asked to confirm her own words in front of witnesses, and then I watched their eyes shift as they realized the detail that mattered was not my tone, but her reaction. The hallway was quiet for a minute. Then I heard Lena's voice in that half-whisper she uses when she thinks secrecy is the same thing as innocence, and it made my jaw tighten even though I kept my face calm. I did not strain to listen, because I did not need to catch every word. I only needed to watch patterns, because patterns tell the truth even when language lies. Her footsteps moved toward the front door, the lock clicked, and then the night air slipped inside as she stepped onto the porch, which was a simple move with a very loud meaning. She did not want a conversation, she wanted a call, and she did not want that call heard inside our house. Marin glanced toward the hallway, then back to me, and I could tell she was trying to be kind, while also trying not to be involved, which is what decent people do when they feel the ground shifting under a friend's life. Jonah, on the other hand, looked angry in a quiet way, because he had always believed loyalty was basic, and Lena had just dragged him into a scene where loyalty was being measured like temperature. I told them they could stay for a few minutes if they wanted, or they could go, and either choice was fine, but I asked them not to speak to Lena tonight, not because I wanted to control anything, but because she would use any conversation as a way to manage optics. Jonah nodded slowly, and Marin reached for her purse with a careful, sympathetic expression, and she said she was sorry, which is what people say when they do not know what else to offer. At the door, Jonah paused and looked at me like he was about to ask something uncomfortable. Then he asked anyway, because he is the sort of man who would rather be rude than blind. He asked if I thought she was actually cheating, and I said I did not think anything anymore, because thinking is for people who do not have evidence. I said I was verifying, and verification was not a mood, it was a method. Jonah's eyes narrowed, and he said he had seen her smile at her phone during the last gathering in a way that did not look like work, and that detail landed quietly in my mind, not as proof, but as another brick in the wall. I thanked him, told him to get home safe, and then I closed the door behind them and stood in the entryway for a long moment, listening to Lena's muffled voice outside, feeling how the house seemed to hold its breath with me. When she came back in, her cheeks were slightly flushed from the cold, and she held her phone like it was still connected to a lifeline she did not want to drop. She tried to walk past me toward the kitchen, but I stepped slightly to the side, not blocking her like a guard, but placing myself where she had to acknowledge me. She asked, with a clipped voice, why I was doing this, and I told her I was not doing anything except responding to what she had already done in front of people who knew us. She tried to say she had been joking again, and I let the word hang in the air, because it sounded even weaker in the quiet of our entryway than it did under candlelight. I told her that jokes do not make a person beg in the hallway, and her eyes flashed with something like fear at that, because she realized, too late, that her emotional performance was now part of the record, witnessed by two people who had no reason to lie for me. She asked what I wanted, and I told her I wanted her to stop treating our marriage like a stage where she could improvise cruelty and then call it humor when the crowd turned. I said we were meeting a mediator on Monday, and I said she could come willingly, or she could refuse. But either way, my next move would not change, because the days of me waiting for her to decide whether I deserved respect were over. She started to cry, and for a second it almost looked real, but I have lived with her long enough to know the difference between grief and strategy, and this was strategy wearing grief like a borrowed coat. She said she loved me, she said she did not want a divorce, she said she was stressed, she said she felt trapped, and she kept throwing words at me as if volume could substitute for sincerity. I listened, not because I was moved, but because people reveal themselves when they feel cornered, and every sentence she used was about her comfort, her image, her fear, and her needs, which told me everything I needed to know about what she thought a marriage was supposed to do for her. I told her I was going to sleep in the guest room tonight, and I said it without anger, because anger would have been a gift she could point at later as justification. She followed me down the hall, pleading softly, then sharply, then softly again, switching tones like she was searching for the frequency that used to work. She asked if we could talk privately, and I said we had been talking privately for years, and it never stopped her from humiliating me publicly, so privacy was not a solution. It was just her preferred environment for rewriting what happened. When I closed the guest room door, she stood outside for a while, her breathing loud through the thin wood, Then she walked away, and the quiet that followed felt less like peace and more like a decision. In the dark, I opened my phone and scrolled through our shared calendar, not digging through her private accounts, not hacking anything, just looking at the schedule we both used for household life, the one she assumed was harmless because it was mundane. A pattern jumped out that I had ignored before because I wanted to believe there was nothing to see. Recurring late committee blocks that overlapped with events she had promised to attend with me and then backed out of last minute, plus several vague entries marked as quick errand on afternoons when she also claimed to be in back-to-back meetings. I exported the week view as a PDF, saved it, and printed it in the morning because I wanted dates on paper, not floating in an app that could be edited later. The next day, Lena acted like a woman walking on glass, overly sweet, overly careful, making breakfast as if pancakes could erase public humiliation, and I played my role just as well. Polite, distant, emotionally unavailable in a way that made her uneasy. She kept trying to pull me into side conversations, but I stayed on the surface, because the surface is where you keep control when the other person is trying to drag you into emotional mud. Around noon, she left the house saying she needed to run errands and clear her head, and she added that she might stop by her friend Kira's place, which was her favorite kind of cover story because friend is a word society refuses to question. After she left, I checked the mail and found an envelope from a local hotel, the kind of generic promotional mail that gets sent out when you have booked there before, and my stomach tightened because we had not stayed in a local hotel in years. I opened it slowly, expecting a coupon or a flyer, and inside was a "Thank you for your stay" card, with a membership number printed near the bottom and our home address in the windowed corner, which meant someone had associated our household with their system. The card itself did not accuse anyone, and that was what made it dangerous because neutral documents carry more weight than emotional claims. I photographed the card beside the day's newspaper, saved the image, and slid the paper copy into a clear sleeve, labeling it with the date and a simple note: unsolicited hotel membership mail sent to our home. That evening, while Lena showered, her phone buzzed on the bathroom counter, and the screen lit up with a lock screen preview. Not hacked, not accessed, just visible in the same way a ringing doorbell is visible. The message preview was short, but it was enough, because it included a name I had not seen in years and a line that sounded like familiarity dressed as humor, with a time attached that matched one of those committee calendar blocks. I did not touch the phone, I did not open anything, and I did not need to, because the preview was already the proof of contact. I took a screenshot of my own phone's camera roll after photographing the lock screen from a respectful distance, capturing the time and the sender name, and then I put my phone away and listened to the shower run, feeling the strange relief that comes when doubt finally becomes something you can hold. Monday morning arrived with a gray sky and a heavy stillness, and Lena sat at the kitchen table staring into her coffee like it could tell her what to do next. She asked if I was really going through with the mediator, and I said yes, because hesitation is how you train people to test you again. She tried to bargain, offering counseling, offering a weekend trip, offering promises that sounded expensive and empty, and I told her that if she wanted to save anything, she could start by telling the truth in a room where words had consequences. She went quiet, then she asked, in a small voice, if I had told anyone else, and when I said Jonah and Marin already knew what they heard, she flinched like she had been slapped, because the pain she felt was not about me, it was about losing control of the narrative. As we got ready to leave, she checked her phone again, and each glance looked less like habit and more like a person waiting for instructions. I watched her pull her coat on, watched her adjust her hair in the mirror, watched her practice a face that looked reasonable, and I realized something that chilled me more than the proof I had gathered. She was not preparing to tell the truth. She was preparing to win. When she finally turned toward the door, her eyes met mine, and for a second I saw the calculation behind them, the silent question of what I knew, how much I had, and whether I could be intimidated into backing down. I opened the front door for her, not as a courtesy, but as a signal that I was done reacting and ready to act, and as we stepped outside, my phone vibrated once in my pocket with a new notification that I had not expected, a merchant alert tied to my account showing a charge at a cafe across town, and in the note field, a name appeared that was not mine and not hers, which meant someone had used our shared payment method and left a trail they thought would not matter. The merchant alert stayed on my screen like a bruise that would not fade, and the thing that made it worse was how ordinary it looked, because betrayal rarely arrives with dramatic music. It arrives as a small line item that assumes you will keep being the kind of man who avoids conflict by avoiding facts. The cafe was across town, nowhere near the mediator's office, and the name in the note field was not a business label or a generic tag, but a person's first name, the kind of detail people use when they want a receipt to feel personal, like it belongs to a memory instead of a record. I did not confront Lena in the driveway, because a driveway confrontation is what people remember, and I did not want my story to become the story of me losing control. I wanted my story to become the story of her losing cover. I simply got in the car, started the engine, and drove toward the mediator with her sitting beside me, quiet and tense, tapping her knee like the movement could shake loose a better plan. At the office, the waiting room had that stale neutrality that makes everyone look guilty, even the receptionist, and Lena kept her eyes on the wall clock as if time was a judge she could charm. The mediator, a calm woman named Elise Ward, greeted us with professional warmth and led us into a small room with a round table, a box of tissues placed like a prophecy, and a folder already prepared for what she assumed would be a standard long marriage separation. Elise asked a few baseline questions about assets and routines, and Lena answered too quickly, too smoothly, using the same polished voice she used at parties when she wanted people to think we were a team. When Elise asked why we were here, Lena tried to frame it as a misunderstanding that had spiraled, a joke that landed wrong, stress that had piled up, and I could see her testing which version of reality would be easiest for a stranger to accept. I did not interrupt her, because a liar always feels strongest when they are uninterrupted, and strength makes them careless. When it was my turn, I kept my hands flat on the table and spoke without raising my voice, because controlled calm is the most frightening thing you can offer someone who expects drama. I said we were here because Lena had publicly suggested she preferred other men and then privately treated my response like a bluff, and I said that over the last month her schedule had developed repeated contradictions that made trust impossible. I did not accuse her of sex or romance, because those words invite debates about feelings, and I was not here to debate feelings. I was here to document facts. I told Elise I was willing to proceed with a structured separation and a written plan for living arrangements, finances, and communications, and I said I wanted everything aligned within 30 days so the situation did not turn into chaos masquerading as reconciliation. Lena's face hardened, then softened, then hardened again, like she was flipping masks in her head, and none of them fit the room. Elise asked Lena if there was someone else, and Lena laughed a small laugh that sounded like a door being slammed quietly. She said there was no one, and she said she had just been venting, and she said my coldness was what made her feel alone, as if loneliness were a voucher that could be redeemed for cruelty. Elise asked if Lena would be willing to provide a basic timeline of the last 2 weeks and confirm her stated routine, because even mediators understand that timelines do not care about charm. Lena hesitated, then agreed, and that hesitation was the first crack that mattered, because honest people do not hesitate before describing their own days. We left the session with a follow-up appointment scheduled and a stack of preliminary paperwork, and Lena held those papers in her lap as if they were radioactive. In the parking lot, she finally spoke with that urgent whisper she uses when she thinks intensity can override logic, and she asked what I was doing and why I was trying to humiliate her. I told her no one was humiliating her, and that if humiliation came, it would come from the gap between what she said and what the records showed. She accused me of digging, and I said I had not dug anywhere I did not already have a right to stand. Because I was not interested in being a hero, I was interested in being clean. She tried to say the cafe charge was mine, then she stopped because she could see I was not going to argue about a thing I had already verified in my head. The silence between us hardened into something permanent, and the drive home felt longer than it should have, even though the roads were the same roads we had taken for years. That evening, I did not watch her. I watched the household, because households tell on people when people forget that routine is evidence. Lena moved through the kitchen with restless energy, opening cabinets she did not need, washing dishes that were already clean, and checking her phone whenever she thought my eyes were elsewhere. When she stepped into the laundry room, she left her purse on the counter, and I did not touch it, because touching it would give her a story to tell later. Instead, I waited until she returned and went upstairs, and then I went to the kitchen drawer where we kept spare stationery and pulled out a simple sheet of paper, because the most basic tool is often the most effective. I wrote a timeline line in clean block letters. Saturday, 8:14 p.m. Public statement made. Sunday, 12:37 p.m. Hotel mail. Monday, 9 to 12 a.m. Mediator session. Monday, 10:41 a.m. Cafe charge on my account. And I signed and dated it. Not because my signature made it true, but because it made it anchored. The next day, the pressure arrived from the place pressure always arrives first in long marriages, the social circle that has been watching without admitting it. Marin texted me, asking if Lena was okay, and her wording was careful in the way people are careful when they suspect the truth but do not want to be accused of prying. I replied that Lena was safe, that we were separating, and that I would appreciate discretion, and I could almost feel Marin's shock through the screen even though the message was only a few words. Jonah called later and told me, with a tight voice, that Lena had already reached out to them, framing the whole incident as me snapping and threatening divorce over a harmless joke. Jonah said he did not believe her, but he wanted me to know she was moving fast to control the story, and he sounded both angry and embarrassed, as if he hated being used as a prop. I thanked him again, and I wrote that down too, not as a quotation, but as a note of sequence. Narrative pre-frame attempt begins day 2. That afternoon, another notification arrived, this time from our shared calendar, and it was the kind of thing that seems trivial until you see it in the right light. A committee event that had been on the schedule for weeks was suddenly edited, not deleted, just adjusted by 20 minutes. The kind of edit that would not matter unless someone was trying to make 2 timelines fit together. I opened the calendar view and took a screenshot of the event header showing the last edited stamp, and I saved it with the date in the file name, because edits are confessions when they happen after suspicion is expressed. Lena came home shortly after, and she tried to act casual, but the muscles in her jaw kept tightening, and she kept glancing at the counter where she expected to see her purse, as if she was checking whether anything had moved. Nothing had moved, because I had not touched anything, and that was exactly why her eyes looked more uncertain. She could not find a clean accusation to throw at me. On Wednesday, Lena announced she was going to meet her boss for a work mentorship dinner, and she said it with the same rehearsed brightness people use when they want a sentence to sound too respectable to challenge. I nodded and told her to have a good evening, and the relief on her face was immediate, because she thought my acceptance meant I had surrendered. After she left, I did not follow her, I did not call anyone, and I did not do anything dramatic. I simply opened my banking app and turned on merchant alerts at a tighter threshold for my own account, because I had a legal right to monitor my own spending. At 7:28 p.m., an alert popped up for a restaurant I recognized, a mid-range place we had gone to as a couple years ago, and the amount was enough for 2 people who had ordered drinks and dessert, not enough for a group or a business dinner with receipts separated. The alert was clean, factual, unarguable, and I took a screenshot immediately, then I printed it and signed the back, because digital evidence feels less real to liars than paper does. When Lena came home, she was in the odd, bright mood people get after they have done something they think they deserve, and she kissed my cheek as if affection could be used like a stamp. She told me the dinner was productive and that her boss had really listened, and she said it with emphasis on the word listened, as if she wanted me to picture a professional conversation instead of what had likely happened. I asked her one simple question, a question that sounded boring on purpose, and I asked it without sarcasm so she would not feel attacked. I asked what time the dinner started, because I wanted to coordinate with the next mediator session, and she said 7 p.m. Then she corrected herself and said 6:30 p.m., and that tiny correction mattered more than any emotional confession, because her story was shifting in real time to match whatever she assumed I could prove. I nodded, said nothing else, and watched the color drain from her face as she realized she had just offered 2 different timestamps to a man who no longer accepted vibes as evidence. Later that night, while Lena slept with one arm thrown across her pillow like she was still the innocent one, I sat at the kitchen table with my printed screenshots, my hotel mail photo, and my signed timeline line. I did not feel triumphant, because triumph would mean I had wanted this, and I did not. I felt focused, because focus is what you do when you realize the enemy is not just the betrayal, but the story that betrayal will try to write about you. I stapled the documents in chronological order, wrote a 1-page date-place-payment table, and placed everything in clear sleeves with labels, not because I loved paperwork, but because paperwork is how you keep reality from being negotiated away. And as I slid the last sleeve into the folder, my phone lit up with a new message from an unknown number that contained only one line, short and sharp, like a blade meant to provoke a mistake. It said I should stop digging, or I would regret what came next. The unknown number stayed on my screen for a long minute, not because I was afraid of it, but because I was finally seeing the shape of the game they thought they were playing. And it was not romance, or loneliness, or even midlife panic. It was control, dressed up as desire, backed by intimidation that assumed I would fold the moment a stranger told me to. I did not reply, because replies are oxygen, and I was not going to feed someone who had decided to breathe through my reactions, so I took a screenshot, saved it with the date and time, and placed it in the same sleeve as the restaurant alert, because threats have a funny way of becoming evidence when you stop treating them like secrets. Then I went upstairs, looked at Lena sleeping with her back to me, and realized there was a calm cruelty in how easily she could rest after she had set fire to a 20-year life, as if she believed the smoke would only bother me. In the morning, I did not confront her over breakfast, because breakfast confrontations are for couples who still believe in repair, and I was past that point without needing to announce it. Instead, I asked one practical question in a neutral tone, the same tone I used when we used to coordinate dentist appointments and holiday travel, and I asked her whether her boss had changed the time of the next team meeting because our shared calendar showed another edit made after midnight. Lena froze with her mug halfway to her lips, and she tried to play it off with a shrug, claiming the company was chaotic and meetings moved constantly, but her eyes kept flicking toward my phone like she expected it to accuse her on my behalf. I nodded as if I accepted the explanation, then I asked a second practical question, still neutral, still boring on purpose, and I asked why the meeting edit had been made from her account when she had told me she no longer handled scheduling. Her mouth opened, closed, and opened again, and she shifted into anger because anger is easier than precision. She said I was monitoring her, that I was paranoid, that I was trying to punish her for being honest about her needs, and she leaned hard on the word honest like it was a shield that could block timestamps. I let her talk until she ran out of momentum, then I told her I was not monitoring her. I was documenting my own life because her choices were affecting my finances, my home, and my reputation, and I would not be left holding a narrative she wrote while she smiled in public. She asked what narrative I meant, and the way she asked it told me she already knew she had started one, because innocent people do not demand definitions when they have no plan. I told her I had heard she was telling friends I had snapped and threatened divorce over a joke, and I said it with the same steady voice I used in the mediator's office, and that steadiness was the only thing that made her flinch. She insisted she had never said snapped, but she said it too quickly, and she did not deny the rest, which was its own kind of confession. Then she asked, too casually, whether I had told anyone about her boss, and that was the moment I felt the line tighten, because she was not worried about our marriage. She was worried about optics. That afternoon, I left the house with my folder in my bag, and I drove to a small office above a print shop where a family law attorney named Daniel Price worked behind a door that looked too plain to hold the kind of decisions he helped people make. Daniel was not theatrical, which I appreciated, and he did not ask me how I felt until he asked me what I wanted, because feelings are not enforceable and written terms are. I told him I wanted a separation agreement drafted quickly, with clear financial boundaries and communication rules, and I wanted to protect myself from joint spending that had started to look like funding someone else's nightlife. Daniel reviewed my documentation without lifting his eyebrows because he had seen worse, but when he reached the screenshot of the threat message, his expression sharpened in a way that was almost grateful. He said that message mattered because it showed someone was trying to influence my behavior through intimidation, and intimidation is a bright line that courts and mediators tend to notice even when they pretend not to. Daniel asked me whether I knew who sent it, and I told him I did not, but I had my suspicions, and I said my suspicions were less important than the fact that it existed. He agreed, then told me to keep my actions clean, keep communications minimal, and keep my timeline consistent, because the most common counterattack in these situations was to paint the calm spouse as unstable. He said people who cheat often cheat twice, once with their bodies and once with the story, and I felt a grim satisfaction hearing someone else name the pattern without me having to explain it like a wounded man begging to be believed. We discussed temporary arrangements, and Daniel advised me to separate discretionary spending immediately through a civil request with the bank, not as punishment, but as a protective move that prevented one spouse from draining accounts out of spite. I signed the paperwork and left his office with the strange feeling of relief that comes when you finally stop hoping a person will behave and start acting as if they will not. On the way home, my phone buzzed with a notification from the bank confirming the request had been received and a follow-up appointment had been scheduled, and I saved that confirmation without emotion because emotion was a luxury I had been spending too freely. When I walked into the house, Lena was on a video call in the living room, speaking with that bright professional voice she used when she wanted to sound harmless, and she ended the call too quickly when she saw me. She asked where I had been, and I told her I had been handling logistics, and that answer made her eyes narrow, because logistics is the language of permanence. She tried to pivot into softness, asking whether we could talk like adults and find a way to fix things, but her softness came with an edge, like she expected my guilt to be the lever. I told her we had already talked like adults, and she had laughed in front of our friends, and she had used my calm response as a punchline until she realized I meant it. That landed hard because it forced her to face the timeline of her own arrogance. That evening, the friend circle did what friend circles do when they sense a scandal forming, and they started orbiting like satellites that had lost their anchor. Marin sent a group text about a weekend dinner, and Lena replied immediately with enthusiasm, as if enthusiasm could drown out the fact that she had detonated her marriage in the same room as those people. I replied politely that I would not attend, then I messaged Marin privately and asked if we could talk for 5 minutes, because there is a difference between privacy and secrecy, and I was done being dragged into secrecy. When Marin called, her voice was cautious, and she said Lena had been crying and saying she was scared I would ruin her, and that phrasing made my jaw tighten because it framed consequences as cruelty, which is how guilty people sleep at night. I told Marin I was not ruining anyone and that I was simply refusing to participate in a lie, and I asked her one direct question. Had Lena told her why she was at a restaurant Wednesday night that charged my account for a dinner that was supposedly mentorship? Marin went quiet, then admitted Lena had not mentioned any restaurant, only that she had been at work stuff, and Marin sounded suddenly tired, like she could feel herself being used as a mirror. I did not send Marin my screenshots because I did not need her to become my courier, and I did not want anyone to think I was gossiping. I wanted them to realize Lena's story had holes without me filling those holes with my own anger. I told Marin that I had documentation, that a mediator was already involved, and that I was asking her for one thing only, not to repeat Lena's version as fact until she knew it was true. Marin exhaled, then said she would be careful, and I could hear something shift in her tone, the subtle movement from loyalty to curiosity, which is the first step toward a story collapsing under its own weight. The next day, Lena's desperation turned practical, which is when it becomes dangerous, because desperate people stop caring about dignity and start caring about leverage. She approached me in the kitchen while I was making coffee, and she told me her boss was upset, that there were rumors at work, and that I needed to stop telling people things because it could affect her job. I stared at her for a beat, not because I was surprised, but because she had accidentally admitted the part she had been trying to hide, that her date was not separate from her professional life, and that her workplace was already involved in the fallout. I told her I had not contacted her workplace, and that if rumors existed, they were likely being created by her own behavior, not by my words. She accused me of playing innocent. Then she asked whether I had been taking screenshots of her phone and her calendar, and I told her I had been taking screenshots of what was mine and what was shared, which was the truth and also the boundary she could not stand. She tried a different tactic, leaning closer, lowering her voice, telling me she could make this easy if I stopped, and the moment she said easy, I understood why the threat message existed. Easy for her meant silent for me, and silent for me meant she could keep her boss, keep her reputation, and keep me as the man who pays bills while she shops for excitement. I told her I did not negotiate with intimidation, and I said that calmly, because nothing enrages a manipulator more than a man who refuses to sound afraid. She snapped that I was being cruel, and I asked her, still calm, whether she wanted to define cruel as refusing to fund her dates or refusing to let her rewrite my character in public. She opened her mouth, then closed it, and her eyes flickered with something that looked like panic, because panicked people hate being asked to choose a definition in the light. That night, I received another message from the unknown number, and this one was shorter, as if whoever sent it was getting impatient and decided to sharpen the blade. It said I should think about how my friends would react if they knew what kind of man I really was, and the implication was clear enough to make my stomach go cold because it hinted at a smear, a fabricated accusation designed to force me into defense instead of offense. I took a screenshot, saved it, printed it, and added it to the folder. Then I wrote a note on paper describing the sequence, because when someone tries to threaten you twice, they are not testing you. They are building a pattern. I did not sleep much after that, not because I was trembling, but because my mind was already moving through the next steps with a brutal clarity. And clarity has a cost when it means admitting someone you trusted is willing to destroy you to save herself. In the morning, I checked my phone and saw a missed call from Jonah, and when I called him back, his voice was urgent and embarrassed, as if he hated being the messenger but could not stay silent. He told me Lena had been telling people quietly that I was controlling and that I had started tracking her, and he said she had implied she might need protection if I got worse. I listened without interrupting, because every word he said was another brick in the case she was building, and every brick had to be handled carefully so it did not become the wall that buried me. When Jonah finished, I thanked him, told him I understood, and asked him one thing. Had she said any specific example, any date, any incident that could be checked? And Jonah hesitated, then said she had mentioned Wednesday night and claimed I had lost it when she came home, which was a lie so clean it almost sounded reasonable, and I felt a quiet disgust settle in my chest. I hung up, sat at the kitchen table, and stared at my folder, because I knew the next phase had started, and it was not about proving she was unfaithful. It was about proving I was sane, steady, and documented while she tried to turn my restraint into a threat. I opened my calendar and looked at the upcoming friend dinner Lena had insisted on attending, and I realized she was not going for food or friendship. She was going to test whether she could still control the room's sympathy. I then looked at the mediator appointment scheduled for the following week and the bank appointment confirmation sitting in my email, and I understood exactly where this was headed. She was going to force a public narrative before any paperwork could lock her down. I closed the folder, slid it into my bag, and decided that if she wanted a room to judge me, then I would choose the room, the timing, and the documents, and I would let silence do the work she thought tears could do. And as I walked out the door, my phone buzzed again, this time from Maren, with a message that made my grip tighten around the handle of my bag because it said Lena had invited someone unexpected to the dinner, and she insisted everyone needed to be there to clear the air. By the time I pulled into Maren's driveway, I already knew Lena was not inviting someone unexpected to clear the air, because clearing the air is what honest people do when they want peace, and Lena only cleared the air when she needed a clean stage for a dirty story. The porch light threw a soft cone over the steps, the kind of suburban warmth people pay mortgages for, and I walked up with a bottle of wine I did not plan to open and a folder in my bag I did plan to use, because I had finally accepted the simple truth that our marriage was over the moment she chose an audience over our life. Inside, the house smelled like roasted garlic and candles, and the living room was already filled with the gentle hum of laughter that always sounded innocent until it became a chorus for somebody's humiliation. Maren met me at the door with a tight smile, the kind that says she hates drama but is already standing in it, and she whispered that Lena was already in a mood, which was her polite way of saying Lena had arrived ready to perform. I handed Maren the wine, told her she looked tired, and she gave me a look that said she wished she could step out of her own house and escape the night, but she couldn't, because social circles are small courts with invisible rules. In the dining room, Jonah and his wife were setting plates on the table, and a couple of other friends from our circle were lingering near the kitchen island, pretending not to notice how everyone's eyes kept shifting toward the hallway like they expected a guest to emerge carrying a verdict. Lena was standing by the fireplace when I saw her, dressed like she was going to a gallery opening instead of a friend's dinner, with her hair done too carefully and her mouth curled into that controlled smile she used whenever she wanted to be seen as the reasonable one. She moved toward me with a softness that would have almost looked sincere if I had not heard her call me controlling through other people's mouths. She reached to touch my arm as if we were still a couple, as if a little public affection could rewrite the last few weeks, and I stepped just far enough away that it looked like normal movement and not rejection, because I had learned that visible reactions were ammunition. Her smile tightened for a fraction of a second, then she recovered, and she said she was glad I came because we needed to talk like adults in front of everyone, as if adulthood required witnesses. Before I could answer, the front door opened again, and I heard Maren's voice climb half an octave into forced cheer, the sound people make when they are trying to convince themselves something is fine. I turned, and there he was, standing in the doorway as if he belonged there, holding a cheap bouquet like a prop, wearing a coat that looked like it had been purchased for the purpose of being noticed. Lena's ex was not taller than me, not better looking than me, not younger enough to make the insult elegant, but he had the one thing Lena had been chasing like a drug, which was the thrill of someone who did not share history, responsibility, or consequences. He looked around the room with a practiced grin, the kind a man learns when he has been welcomed into places he did not earn, and Lena's smile widened like she was daring the room to accuse her. She introduced him with that bright, harmless tone that makes people doubt their own instincts, and she said he had been in town and they had reconnected, and she thought it would be healthy for everyone to see there was nothing going on because she was not hiding anything. The room went quiet in the way it does when everyone realizes they are part of something they did not agree to join, and then everyone started speaking at once, filling the silence with small talk and forced jokes, because adults are cowards when embarrassment is in the air. The ex shook hands too firmly, laughed too loudly, and kept glancing at Lena as if he needed her approval, and Lena watched me the whole time like she was studying whether I would explode on cue. I did not give her the cue, because I was not going to be the villain in a script she wrote, so I greeted him politely, asked how long he was in town, and let my tone remain steady enough to make his grin flicker. He answered with the confidence of a man who believed the room was on his side. Then he added a remark about how small the world is, and he laughed like it was charming, but his eyes were sharp, like he was trying to measure whether I was dangerous. Lena stepped in and steered the conversation toward dinner, toward seating, toward anything that would keep the energy moving before anyone could ask a real question. At the table, the seating felt arranged, not accidental, because Lena ended up close enough to her ex that their shoulders nearly brushed whenever they reached for the same dish, and she ended up far enough from me that we looked like strangers who shared a last name by mistake. Maren sat across from me with an apologetic expression, Jonah sat beside her, and the others formed a loose ring that suddenly felt like an arena. Lena began with a toast that sounded like a speech from someone who had practiced in front of a mirror, and she talked about growth and honesty and how long marriages go through phases, and how important it was to not jump to conclusions when someone was finding themselves. The ex raised his glass with a grin that did not match the words, and I watched him carefully, because men like him love the illusion of being the reason someone's life changes, even if all they really do is pour gasoline on a fire. When Lena finished, she turned to me with a gentle expression that was designed to look concerned, and she asked if I wanted to say anything, because she wanted everyone to see I had a chance to be reasonable. I set my fork down slowly, not for drama, but for control, because slow movements force people to watch, and watching is the first step toward listening. I thanked Marin for hosting. I said I did not want to ruin the night, and I told everyone I was not here to argue about feelings, because feelings were too easy to fake. But I was here because my name had been dragged into conversations I was not part of, and my behavior had been described in ways that did not match reality. Lena's smile held, but I saw her eyes tighten, because she could feel the room shifting from sympathy to curiosity, and curiosity is where liars lose their grip. I said I had been told I was tracking Lena, that I was unstable, and that I was punishing her, and I said those words calmly, not accusing her directly, just placing the claims on the table like objects that could be examined. Jonah looked down at his plate, and Marin's eyes widened slightly because she recognized the exact phrases Lena had used in private. Lena tried to interrupt, but I raised one hand gently, not commanding, just signaling that I would finish my thought, and I said I was not going to raise my voice or throw accusations, but I would ask one question, and the answer would settle whether this was my imagination or Lena's reality. I reached into my bag and pulled out my phone, keeping it low, not brandishing it, because I did not want it to look like a weapon, and I said I had received a bank alert on Wednesday night for a restaurant charge that came from a card tied to my account. Lena's ex shifted in his chair in a way that was almost invisible, but I saw it, because guilt has a body language, and it always leaks. Lena's eyes flashed, and she said this was not the place, and she accused me of trying to embarrass her, and I nodded as if I understood the concern. Then I said I was not trying to embarrass anyone, but I needed to know why she had told people she was at work stuff that night. While my account paid for a dinner I was not invited to attend, the room went quiet again, a cleaner silence this time because it was not awkward small talk. Silence. It was the silence of people realizing a story has a receipt attached. Lena laughed once, sharp and fake, and she said I was twisting things, and that she had told me she met friends after work, and that it was nothing, and I did not argue with her, because arguing is a sport she knows how to play. Instead, I said I was happy to accept that explanation if it matched one other fact, and I asked her why our shared calendar showed a meeting that had been edited after midnight, a meeting she claimed was moved by the office, even though the edit was made from her own account. Marin's eyebrows lifted, and Jonah's wife inhaled quietly like she wanted to disappear into her chair. Lena's ex tried to laugh it off, and he said calendars were confusing, and he offered a joke about technology, but nobody laughed because jokes die when they land on numbers. Lena's voice sharpened, and she told me I was acting like a private investigator, and she asked if I had been taking screenshots of her phone, and I said I had not needed to take screenshots of her phone because she had been careless enough to let the shared parts of our life contradict her private version of events. She tried to paint me as obsessive, and I kept my expression neutral, because the more neutral I looked, the more frantic she sounded, and frantic people do not win credibility contests in front of witnesses. Then the ex did something stupid. The kind of stupid men do when they believe confidence can replace facts, and he leaned forward and said casually that maybe I should let her breathe, because a man should not act threatened by an ex, and he said it like he was delivering wisdom. I looked at him for a moment, then I asked him, politely, whether he was the one who had been in town on Wednesday night. His grin froze, and he glanced at Lena, and Lena's eyes widened in warning, because she could feel the trap forming. He hesitated just long enough for the room to notice, and then he said yes. He had been in town, but that did not mean anything, and he tried to smile again, but his smile looked thinner now, like it was held together by effort. I nodded slowly, then I said thank you, because I did not need more than that, and I turned back to the table, back to the people who mattered, and I told them I was not asking anyone to pick sides based on emotion. I said I was asking them to be careful about repeating accusations about me that were not true, because those accusations could have consequences, and I said it without drama, because drama would make it sound like a threat. Lena's face had changed, and her confident performance had cracked into irritation, then panic, then a forced attempt at tears that did not quite arrive on time, because she was struggling to decide which version of herself would sell best in this room. Marin cleared her throat and said gently that maybe everyone should take a breath, and she asked Lena why she felt the need to bring her ex here tonight, and the question was so simple it was devastating because it forced Lena to explain motive. Lena tried to say she wanted transparency, she wanted closure, she wanted everyone to stop assuming things, and the more she spoke, the more her words sounded rehearsed, like a script that had been practiced for a different audience. Jonah finally looked up and said he had heard Lena describe me as controlling, and he asked her quietly whether she still believed that, and Lena's head snapped toward him like she could not believe he was not staying in line. For a moment, Lena seemed to realize the room was not hers, and her ex sensed it too, because he shifted again, restless. like he was calculating how quickly he could exit without looking guilty. Lena reached for my hand across the table, and the gesture was so sudden and performative that it almost made me laugh, because she wanted the image of reconciliation more than she wanted reconciliation itself. I did not take her hand, and I did not pull away dramatically. I simply left my hands where they were, and that quiet refusal spoke louder than any argument. Lena's voice broke, and she asked me, in front of everyone, if I was really going to throw away 20 years over a joke and one dinner, and I looked at her with the same calm I had used from the beginning, and I told her this was not about one joke or one dinner. I told her it was about respect and truth, and the fact that she had started building a story where I was the danger so she could justify herself as the victim, and I said it plainly enough that the room understood, even if they did not want to. Her ex pushed his chair back slightly, preparing to stand, and I watched him, because men like him leave the moment the spotlight turns into a searchlight. The dinner ended without a clean conclusion, because real life rarely gives you a neat ending, and people began making excuses to check on the oven, to take a call, to step outside, anything to break the pressure. Lena followed me into the hallway as I grabbed my coat, and she whispered that I was humiliating her, that I was poisoning our friends, that I was making her look like a monster, and I told her, quietly, that she had made herself look like whatever she was, and I was simply refusing to wear her mask. Her eyes flashed with anger, and she said if I did not stop, she would tell people everything, and the phrasing hit me like ice, because it did not sound like truth. It sounded like a threat wrapped in vague language. I walked out into the cold air with my heart steady and my stomach tight, and I got into my car without rushing, because rushing makes you look guilty, and I was done looking guilty for her choices. As I pulled away from Marin's house, my phone buzzed, and the screen lit with another message from the unknown number, but this time it was not a warning. It was a demand, and it said I had until tomorrow morning to fix this, or they would make sure everyone saw the version of me Lena wanted them to see. The message sat on my screen like a cigarette burn on clean fabric, small but impossible to ignore. And when I reread it for the third time, I stopped pretending this was just Lena panicking and throwing random threats into the air. Fix this by morning, it said, as if my marriage was a broken appliance, as if my dignity was a hinge you could tighten, and then it added the part that mattered, the part that told me someone else had stepped into the driver's seat. It promised a version of me that everyone would see, and I could already hear the language Lena liked to use when she needed a villain. Words like unstable, controlling, obsessive, dangerous, and I could already picture how quickly people would accept it if it arrived wrapped in concern. I parked in our driveway and sat in the dark with the engine off, watching the quiet window glow of our kitchen like it belonged to a stranger's home, and I forced myself to think in practical steps instead of feelings. Whoever sent that message believed they had leverage, and leverage always comes from two things: access and timing, which meant the sender either knew what Lena was planning or they were part of it. I didn't reply, because replies are oxygen, and I had learned that a liar's story grows stronger when you argue with it, so I let the message hang unanswered and went inside as if the night was normal. Lena wasn't home, which did not surprise me, and the house felt staged in her absence. Too neat, too quiet, like even the furniture was waiting to hear which story would win. I set my bag on the counter, poured a glass of water I didn't drink, and opened the folder I had started building the day she decided our marriage was a punchline. The folder had screenshots of the bank alerts tied to my account, a printed week view from our shared calendar with the edits highlighted, a photo of the receipt I'd requested from the restaurant after proving I was the cardholder, and a short page of notes with dates and times written in my handwriting because I wanted a paper trail that didn't depend on anyone believing my tone. I added one new line at the bottom, a simple fact that made my jaw tighten as I wrote it. Unknown number, midnight, fix this, threatened smear. When you've been married for 2 decades, you learn the shape of your spouse's manipulations the way you learn the shape of your own hands, and I could feel the pattern forming. First, she humiliates you in public, then she tests your boundaries, then she paints your boundary as cruelty. Then she recruits witnesses who don't know they're being used. The only new element was this message, which meant the circle had widened, and widening circles always point to someone who benefits from reputation damage. Lena's ex wanted attention, but he didn't strike me as the type who built careful threats. He was a man who enjoyed the front of the stage, not the backstage work. If this was strategy, it came from someone who handled narratives for a living, someone who understood policy, complaints, and timing, someone who knew how to make an accusation stick long enough to do real harm. I took my phone upstairs, opened the message thread, and stared at the number again, because numbers don't feel like people until you attach them to a face. I did the only lawful thing that mattered in that moment, which was not some fantasy of tracing it, but a quiet step that made the threat less powerful. I saved screenshots of the text with timestamps, then I emailed them to myself with a plain subject line. Nothing dramatic, just document. Because I wanted the record to exist outside my device, outside a single point of failure, and I wanted it to exist before morning. Then I called the one person whose job it was to stay calm when other people tried to set fires. Her name was Talia Mercer, and she was the attorney I'd consulted 2 weeks earlier when Lena's first jokes started turning into a public personality. Talia answered with the tone of someone who had been awake late enough times to know panic never improves a situation, and when I told her about the message, she didn't gasp or scold or tell me to breathe. She asked 2 precise questions. First, had Lena threatened me like this directly before? And second, did I have proof of the threat beyond my word? When I told her I had screenshots with timestamps and a clean chain of custody, she paused, then said the sentence that changed the shape of the morning. She said I should file. Tonight? Not because filing was emotional, but because filing created a legal spine that other people would have to respect. An hour later, I was sitting in Talia's office conference room, the city outside the window looking flat and distant, and I felt strangely calm, because there is relief in doing something concrete. Talia laid out the initial petition, explained what it did and did not mean, and she made one thing painfully clear. If Lena's side wanted to paint me as unstable, then the best defense was not an argument. It was documented restraint, documented intent, and documented boundaries, which meant I needed a clean timeline and clean evidence. She told me to avoid private confrontations, avoid emotional messages, avoid anything that could be sliced into a screenshot and used as a weapon, and then she asked if I was aware of any workplace entanglements, because the language in the threat sounded like someone used to corporate leverage. That question landed heavier than it should have, because it wasn't new information so much as a confirmation of what I'd already suspected. Lena worked under a senior director named Grant Huxley, a man who had always smiled at me like he was politely dismissing a waiter, and over the past month I'd heard his name too often in Lena's work stories, always delivered casually, always paired with late meetings and sudden schedule changes. Grant had influence over hiring and terminations, and he had the kind of reputation that made people swallow discomfort to keep their paychecks. If Grant had stepped into Lena's mess, it wasn't to protect her feelings. It was to protect his own position, his own image, and whatever arrangement he had created that required my silence. Talia didn't need me to accuse anyone, because accusations are cheap. She needed me to anticipate what could happen next. She said that if a smear was coming, it would likely arrive as a concern, raised to HR or to our friend circle, and it would be framed as protection for Lena. She said we could preempt some of that by documenting the threat, documenting my intent to separate, and documenting that I was not seeking contact or conflict, and then she did something that made me respect her more than I already did. She offered to send a formal notice to Lena, a short letter stating that all communication should go through counsel, because when you put a boundary in writing, it becomes harder to pretend you crossed it. I left Talia's office with a stamped receipt and a quiet clarity that felt like armor, and when I got back to my car, my phone buzzed again. This time, the unknown number didn't threaten, it tried to soften. It said there was no need to make this ugly, and it suggested I talk to Grant in the morning, as if Grant was some neutral mediator instead of Lena's boss, as if my marriage had become a workplace issue that needed a manager's hand. The mention of his name was the confirmation I needed, because Lena had never called him Grant around me. She always called him Mr. Huxley, like she was performing respect. Whoever sent that message knew his preferred name, which meant they were close enough to speak his language. I didn't answer, because I didn't need to win a text conversation. I needed to win reality. Instead, I drove to the restaurant from Wednesday night, the one tied to the bank alert, and I went inside under the bright, indifferent lights that make every lie look slightly ridiculous. I asked for the manager, showed my cardholder information, and requested a copy of the receipt for the charge, and I kept my voice steady because steady voices get cooperation. The manager, a tired man with a practical face, returned with a printed copy that had the time, the table number, and a note in the system that made my stomach go cold. It listed the reservation name, and it wasn't Lena's, it was Grant's. I sat in my car with the receipt on the passenger seat like it was radioactive, and I understood in one clean moment why the threat had arrived so quickly after the dinner. This wasn't just Lena seeking attention from an ex, this was Lena stepping into a protected circle, a circle where powerful people did not accept consequences from ordinary husbands. The ex had been a prop, a familiar face to make her behavior look like nostalgia, but the real engine was her boss, and the boss didn't want a domestic dispute. He wanted control of the narrative before it reached anyone who could record it. I went home just before dawn, and when Lena walked in an hour later, she looked exhausted in a way that had nothing to do with guilt and everything to do with calculation. She froze when she saw the formal letter on the kitchen counter, the one Talia's office had delivered by courier. and for a second her face lost its performance and showed pure alarm. She tried to laugh, tried to call me dramatic, tried to ask if I was really doing this, and when I didn't answer, she moved closer, lowering her voice, saying we could fix it, saying she didn't mean anything, saying she was joking, saying the same rotating excuses she'd used for years whenever she wanted the benefit of doubt without the burden of truth. I let her talk until her words started tripping over each other, and then I did the only thing that mattered. I asked one question, quietly, without anger, and I watched her eyes instead of her mouth. I asked why Grant Huxley's name was on the reservation tied to my account. Lena's breath caught in her throat like she'd swallowed a sharp object, and she stared at me as if she couldn't decide whether to deny, to confess, or to attack. She chose attack, because that's what people choose when the truth has teeth. And she snapped that I was stalking her, that I was humiliating her, that I was trying to ruin her career, and then she said the sentence that told me the next move was already in motion. She said HR was already aware of my behavior, and she said it with the confidence of someone repeating a script she'd been handed. That was the late twist, and it wasn't romantic or dramatic. It was procedural, which made it worse. They weren't just trying to hurt my feelings, they were trying to build a file. Lena wasn't begging because she loved me. She was begging because she realized I was about to become a problem Grant couldn't manage quietly. My phone vibrated again, and the unknown number sent a final instruction, as if I was an employee who needed guidance. It told me to show up at 9, to keep things professional, and to remember that false accusations go both ways, which was the kind of line people use when they know they're cornered. I looked at Lena, and I saw her smirk start to return. Small but real, because she believed the morning would end with me on the defensive, sitting in an office while she played victim and her boss played protector. I didn't argue with her, and I didn't raise my voice because I wasn't walking into a trap unprepared. I picked up my folder, added the restaurant receipt with Grant's name, slipped the threat screenshots into the front sleeve, and set my keys beside it like a promise. Lena watched me as if she could sense the ground shifting, and for the first time that week, her confidence looked shaky because she realized I wasn't coming to beg for my marriage. I was coming to make them speak on the record, and I was coming with paper. By 8:45, I was already parked across the street from Lena's glassbox office, watching early commuters file through revolving doors like they were entering a machine that would chew them up politely, and I kept my breathing slow because any hint of agitation was exactly what Grant's people would try to bottle and label. I had dressed the way I always did for serious meetings, plain jacket, plain shoes, no jewelry, no drama, because the first trick in any smear is to make the target look like they arrived to perform. In the passenger seat, my folder sat open to the only pages that mattered, the restaurant receipt with Grant Huxley's reservation name tied to my cardholder account, the screenshot chain of the midnight threats, the printed week view of our shared calendar showing edits that matched the dinner time, and the bank alert line that proved the payment origin without requiring any trust in my storytelling. I walked in at 8:57, checked in with a receptionist who tried to read my face and failed, and I waited in a small conference area where the furniture was designed to keep you upright and cooperative. The air smelled like coffee and carpet glue, and the silence in the corridor had that corporate quality where people don't whisper because they are kind, but because they are afraid of being recorded. When the HR representative called my name, her tone stayed neutral in the way people learn when they spend their careers sitting between liability and ego, and she led me down a hallway lined with framed values posters that looked like they were printed for decoration rather than belief. The room they put us in had a long table, a screen on the wall, and a thin stack of printed policy pages already waiting, which told me they had built their script before I entered the building. Grant was already seated, relaxed enough to look bored, and Lena was beside him, shoulders tense, chin lifted, eyes bright with the kind of stubborn confidence that shows up when someone thinks they are protected. Another person sat at the far end, a legal liaison with a laptop open, fingers hovering like she expected to type minutes, and I noted that detail immediately, because minutes are where stories go to become permanent. The HR representative opened the meeting with the predictable framing, saying there had been concerns raised about workplace boundaries and personal conduct affecting employee well-being, and she kept her eyes on me just long enough to gauge whether I would react like a man who came to fight. Grant's posture stayed easy, and he tried to project that quiet authority men like him wear like cologne, while Lena's mouth tightened when she realized I wasn't going to start defending myself with emotion. When HR mentioned reports, I understood the trap fully, because the word suggested multiple sources, and multiple sources suggest truth, even when the sources are just echoes. I let them speak until the setup was complete, because interruptions only give liars opportunities to complain about your tone, and then I asked for one procedural thing before anything else could be twisted. I asked, calmly, that whatever allegations were being referenced be put in writing and attached to the meeting record, and I asked that any discussion of my behavior include the exact date and time of the alleged incident. The HR representative hesitated because she had expected a defensive man, not a precise one, and she glanced toward the legal liaison, who began typing with a faint increase in speed, because requests like mine create obligations. Grant finally leaned forward and said I was overcomplicating what was essentially a private marital issue, and he suggested we keep things professional by focusing on Lena's comfort and my boundary issues. And the way he said it confirmed everything, because he spoke like the manager of a narrative, not like a neutral bystander. Lena added her part, saying I had been monitoring her and embarrassing her, and she tried to describe the restaurant receipt as stalking rather than proof, which was a clever move if you ignored the part where the payment was mine. She kept her voice steady, and I could see her trying to build a picture of fear, because fear is the fastest path to sympathy in rooms like this. I didn't argue the feelings, because feelings are fog, and fog is where people like Grant hide. Instead, I slid one page across the table, the policy sheet HR had printed, and I pointed to a single paragraph about conflicts of interest and misuse of subordinate relationships, and then I slid the restaurant receipt beside it, placing the two pages together as if they belonged in the same sentence. I said, without raising my voice, that I was not here to debate anyone's emotions, and that I was here to make sure HR understood the overlap between the policy and the documented payment trail connected to Lena's boss. The room changed in a way you could feel, because policy creates gravity, and gravity makes people stop performing. Grant's face tightened for half a second, and then he tried to regain the room by laughing lightly, the way powerful people do when they think humor can shrink evidence. He said the reservation name was a standard practice because he had arranged a team dinner, and he suggested the charge was accidental, and he implied Lena had only been present as part of work-related mentorship. Lena nodded too quickly, and her nod was the first real crack, because it showed coordination rather than spontaneity. The HR representative looked down at the receipt, then back up at Grant, and the legal liaison's fingers started moving again, faster now, because she could smell the shift from interpersonal complaint to compliance exposure. I added the second piece without drama, because drama would have helped them. I placed the screenshots of the midnight messages on the table, with timestamps visible, and I said the threat had arrived after the dinner and after I had consulted counsel, and I said it referenced Grant by first name, which suggested coordination and access. Lena flinched at that, a small involuntary movement, and Grant's eyes flicked toward her before he caught himself, because the human body betrays alliances faster than words do. I told HR I had no interest in contacting employees or causing scenes, and that I had already instructed all communication to go through counsel, and I said the purpose of my presence today was to prevent the misuse of workplace systems to harass a private citizen. The HR representative asked Grant whether he had communicated with Lena outside normal channels, and she tried to keep it neutral, but her tone had changed, because she could no longer treat this like a husband's complaint. Grant tried to deflect by saying Lena was a valued employee, and he had only offered support, and he made it sound noble, as if he was rescuing her from my alleged instability. Then the HR representative asked the question that ended the performance, because it was the kind of question policy departments are trained to ask when they need to protect the company. She asked whether the expense had been reimbursed as a business cost, and whether any personal relationship existed that could compromise reporting lines. Lena answered too fast, saying there was no personal relationship and that I was twisting things, and then she added a detail she did not need, claiming she had left early and gone straight home that night. That extra detail would have been harmless if she hadn't already edited our shared calendar that week, and if my phone hadn't already saved the bank alert timestamp, and if I didn't already have the confirmation from the restaurant manager about the reservation ownership. I didn't accuse her of lying, because accusations are loud and evidence is quiet, and I had promised myself I would only use quiet tools. I opened the printed week view and placed it beside her statement, showing the calendar entry she had labeled as late meeting, and I pointed to the time block that overlapped with the restaurant's charge time. Then I placed the bank alert line beneath it, because when you stack dates, places, and payments, even polite people start to see the shape of deceit. I asked Lena, in the same calm tone, to confirm which of her two timelines was true, and I let the question sit long enough for silence to do its work. Lena's eyes darted toward Grant again, looking for the next script line, and that glance was more damaging than any sentence she could have spoken. Grant finally snapped, not loudly, but with the thin impatience of a man who expected obedience, and he tried to reframe the meeting as harassment of a senior leader. The HR representative held up one hand, and in that moment I saw the power dynamic turn. Because HR doesn't exist to protect people like Grant, it exists to protect institutions from people like Grant. She asked the legal liaison to read back what had been entered into the record so far, and the liaison did it in the steady tone of a courtroom clerk, listing policy reference, receipt tied to the boss's reservation name, threat message naming the boss, and calendar contradiction tied to the employee's statement. Lena tried to interrupt, saying the messages could be from anyone and that I had manipulated the context, but the HR representative stopped her and said they were not determining criminal guilt. They were determining policy exposure and potential retaliation. Grant tried to regain control by saying he wanted my documents removed from the record, and the HR representative replied that the documents had been presented voluntarily and were now part of the compliance review process. When she said the words, compliance review, Lena's face drained because she understood what that meant in her world, and Grant's jaw clenched because he understood it even better. The HR representative ended the meeting without theatrics, stating that Grant would be placed on immediate administrative leave pending investigation, that Lena would be instructed not to contact me directly, and that any further attempts to use workplace systems to intimidate or discredit a private party would be treated as retaliation. She asked the legal liaison to print a stamped acknowledgement that evidence had been received, and the liaison slid the paper across the table with a crisp motion that felt like a door closing. Lena stared at the stamped page as if it had insulted her personally, and Grant stared at me as if he couldn't decide whether he hated me more for the evidence or for the calm. I stood, collected my folder, and left the stamped acknowledgement on the table for them to look at, because the point was never to win an argument. It was to force reality into a place they couldn't edit. Lena said my name as if it was a hook she could still pull, and Grant muttered something about consequences. But I didn't turn around, because turning around would have made it emotional, and emotion was the only weapon they had left. I walked out through the corridor of framed values, past the receptionist who suddenly wouldn't meet my eyes, and into the cold air outside, where my phone buzzed once more with a new message that arrived too late to matter. It wasn't a threat this time, and it wasn't an apology either, because Lena had never been good at clean apologies when she wasn't in control. It was a single line asking if we could talk like adults, and the phrasing made me almost smile, because adults don't smirk through humiliation and then beg when the paperwork shows up. I didn't answer, because the meeting had already given the only reply that counts in my world, and as I drove away, I felt the clean relief of watching their story collapse under its own timestamps.